So the first question you ask about conflating normative grounding and metaphysical grounding. So first of all, I didn't mean to, I kind of mean to deny that distinction in the moral case. But first of all, I didn't want to deny it across the board. So in the examples that you have provided, for instance, I wouldn't deny that, you know, those are all the same why questions. So in many of these cases, the distinction makes sense, I think. But in the moral case, the main point that I'm trying to make is not even entirely deny the distinction, but to claim that any kind of, whenever we, so let's take a particular example. Let's take slavery, for example. So, okay, why is it wrong? Because of, you know, the pain and suffering, humiliation, and so on. And then we ask another why question, and the realist comes and says something about this action, without which, had the action not have this property, it wouldn't have been wrong. So that, to me, I'm not saying that it is nothing but a normative claim, but what I'm saying is that kind of a general claim about the nature of the wrongness of slavery cannot help being also normatively significant. It cannot, I don't see how, so there is slavery, we're explaining why it's wrong, and we're saying also what makes this action wrong is this property, and it exists independently of what we think. When we make a claim like that about the nature of wrongness and the wrongness of this action in particular, I don't understand how that is not going to be part of the reason why this action is wrong. Because if it didn't have this property, a property of this kind, it wouldn't have been wrong. So I'm not saying that realism cannot be anything other than a normative claim, but I don't understand how it can fail to be a normative claim as well. It has to be part of the reason why this action is wrong. To the counterfactual. So I'm not really, I tried to make this point in different ways. So I'm not even sure I understand this notion of an independent moral reality in the first place, a metaphysical one. So when I say, you know, what if it didn't exist? Would this action still be wrong? So I don't even understand what I'm talking about. But that's exactly, like you said, that's exactly my point. I think we can make the point in negative terms, for example. So here's slavery. We list all the things that make it wrong. And then my question would be not, you know, what if this thing didn't exist? But isn't this enough from a moral point of view? Why isn't it wrong, morally objectionable, to require something else, whatever that is? So again, I mean, I just want to emphasize that my question is a moral relevance question. Sometimes I pretend I understand what I'm talking about when I talk about an independent moral reality, but really that's not necessary for my point.
Okay, thanks. Christos?
Okay, first of all, about the charge that just by citing a disjunctivist moral ontology and just citing what we believe is wrong is cheating. Of course it's cheating, but that's not my position. It wasn't even Jackson's position, because Jackson said the disjunctive properties you will find will be discovered by mature form of morality. What I'm saying is that the virtuous agent will perceive, because of his virtues, of course you might attack the notion of a virtuous agent, but that's another worry. It's the virtuous agent who discerns what these disjuncts should be included in our long disjunction of what is good. That's a different claim. It would be very naive to say that we just include in our disjunction all we think is good, I think. Now about the worry that what I'm talking about is not multiple realizability. If I understood you correct, what you're saying is that I claim that different properties realize good from context to context. There are many such properties. And if I got you right, what you're claiming is that perhaps it's just the same property across contexts that realizes the property, just that we didn't discover it yet. Something of the sort. So suppose before we discover that water has certain molecular structure, we say, in this context, water is realized by certain descriptive characteristics. It's transparent and so on, in different contexts, and we seem to think that different descriptive natural properties realize the property of good. But when we discover the essential property of water, H2O molecules, we just see that what unifies. Is that the worry?
No. The worry is that you haven't shown that many things realize the property of goodness. All you've shown is that many things in different contexts can be good. But that's not the same thing. That's not what goodness consists in. It's just many things that are good. So the analogy with wetness is more I think, more the right one here.
Okay. Can you go on a bit with the...
Well, if you can show that many different things are, sometimes towels are wet, sometimes clothes are wet, that doesn't show anything about multiple realization. It's a very same property, wetness. It's just that different things have that property in different contexts. Right, so you show me that in different, sometimes it's good to maximize utility, sometimes it's good to respect humanity.
No, I can't say that goodness consists in maximizing.
Fair enough. That's what the claim should be. But all I say is that you haven't established that claim. And that claim doesn't follow from the fact that in different contexts, different things are good. It's a further claim. That's what we need.
Yeah. So my claim would be that in different contexts, goodness consists in a different natural property, which is sufficient for identification. There's another kind of wrinkle here, which is, it kind of parallels the debate about functionalism in philosophy of mind, because there are the realizer functionalists, and there are the causal role functionalists. The realizer, like Putnam, they just say that the mental property is realized by a physical and neural property, but the two are distinct. The causal role functionalists, like Chalmers and King, they say they are one and the same property, qualia aside. So maybe something like this you're worrying. You're worrying whether the two properties are distinct or they are identifiable in that given context. Because if it's the first, then it's basically consistent with your naturalism. You're saying the properties are distinct and the property is not reducible to the natural realism. I think I mean the second one. The property just consists in that certain property that realizes good in the context. And that has implications about the open question argument. So for example, take the first example I gave about the great natural disaster and so on. So the way to formulate the open question argument as to appear closed is to contextualize it and say, is what the virtuous agent thinks is good in that certain context, blah, 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 the descriptive material. Is that the good thing? And I think that the virtuous agent will see that it's closed. Of course, I built a lot into the notion of a virtuous agent, and if that doesn't hold water, the whole theory just collapses.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So,
yeah. I think the main point I wanted to ask has been already met, but I still think that there is a kind of confusion of ontological questions and kind of pragmatic question, because it's not question whether disjunctive properties exist. I mean, they seem to be like free lunch. If we accept simple properties.
I just assume that for the sake of the argument.
But the question is not whether they exist or not. I mean, granted that we have simple properties, and granted some kind of classical logic, or granted how disjunction work, right? They are just out there. Now the question is whether they play any role in our theory. I mean, that's quite different question. It's not like ontological question whether we should accept the existence of disjunction properties. That's not quite. They are out there. I mean, we have to live with that, right? They are just out there. the question is whether we use them non-trivially in our whether they play any role in our philosophical analysis.
That's basically the reason why people think that we should just apply a counteraiser and deflate our ontology of disjunctive properties, because they feel that they are not explaining anything. They're just useless.
But they exist. I mean,
I just assume that they exist, and I said, look, if this theory is promising, at least a bit promising, and it promises to provide explanatory benefits and so on, then we might have some reason, at least in the case of normative properties, to think that they are disjunctive and keep it in our ontology. In science, for example, such properties are highly disputable, because many feel that if you say, I don't know, that some building is on fire, you say what caused the fire is either a lightning bolt or electrical circuit, or that doesn't just explain anything. That's the worry, and I understand it. But my claim is that if the theory is promising as it appears, then we have some reason to start suspecting that they might be ontologically indefensible in the end. But I share your intuitions. I mean, I'm aware of the difficulty there.
Okay, Dan.
This is the Melis. I suspect that there's a misunderstanding in what are the type of facts that realists assume. In other words, it kind of gives you a picture that there are apples and oranges, and then there's wall effect, or the same kind of thing. And it's not because the fact they have in mind. And I want to suggest maybe, I wonder if you thought of of mathematical realism. Because there too you can ask, well, suppose I had an apple and another apple in a world in which 1 + 1 did not equal 2 because there was no mathematical facts. Would I still have 2 apples? And whatever things seem clear with that question, I think would follow too. And then what the how the mathematical realists answer that question, and maybe what kind of factors are they thinking about? I think this can help with your argument, thinking about the parallel with mathematical realism.
Is the worry that what the moral realist says is basically, slavery is wrong, and to say that it is a fact is just to say that it is wrong.
And that it's independent, and it's not.
Yeah, so that's where it gets tricky for me, especially. So I think I didn't really. I'm not sure if I can articulate it well, but I think these analogies with non-evaluative domains, like mathematics, for example, or empirical domain, I don't think the analogy is going to work. So we're not going to have a similar objection to realism in those domains. In other words, I really think that what makes moral realism problematic in the sense that I'm suggesting is that morality is an evaluative domain. It is about what is important. So whenever we say, that's why basically I think it is impossible to say something about all the actions that are wrong without also claiming, without implying that matters a lot. Because this is like I said, this is a domain of where we talk about what is important. And here's something that is, in other words, there can't be an explanation of why something is important. That explanation also has to be a claim about what matters. So going back to your question, so we take an action like slavery, we explain what's, all the pain and suffering, and then we don't say anything. We don't say that, and of course the wrongness of slavery depends on what we think. So we don't do that. If we just stop on that level, slavery is wrong because of all these things, then I don't think there's a problem. But I don't think we are also, if we don't say anything further, like, also this is so independently of what we think, or this is so, and it is a fact. So No, what I'm trying to say is, if you don't, so to be not non-objectionable, a realist must not say anything. So there's the dilemma. So we say all the morally relevant things, and then you don't say anything. If that counts as realism, then that's fine. But I don't think that is.
So you say it's a fact. That's all you're saying. You don't
Yeah, then that part would be.
You say it's a fact in the sense that it's not something that it's independent.
Yeah. See, that's when I think realism becomes objectionable. Anything. Because I think the problem with those editions, and it is a fact, it would be so even if everyone. That is basically putting forward a universal condition for anything to be generally wrong. So we are making the wrongness of those things ultimately dependent on that metaphysical fact. And that is what I find objectionable in realism. What if that weren't the case? Then those things would not be wrong?
Okay. Jonathan, what's that?
Yes, it's actually the same line of attack that Melis is using. And so I'm just wondering whether this sounds like the right way of phrasing your position. Can you put it in terms of justification? So imagine the realist says, this is wrong, and you say, well, try to justify to me the claim that I need to act that way. And now the realist has two options. Say, there's no justification. It's just so, that just sounds dogmatic. And traditionally the realist, maybe not David, I think David is maybe kind of alienating himself from traditional realists, but traditional realists said, no, the justification is that there are facts about the matter. That's why you have to do it. It's not just that I'm announcing that you have to do it and I have nothing else to say. I'm offering you a justification.
These are not the only two options. You can offer arguments and they're going to come to an end at some point, just like anyone else can do. Right? Why should you do this? Well, because it will cause suffering. And why can't you do this? And why is it bad to cause suffering? Well, because, I don't know, something about the golden rule. And so, and at some point, oh, and why that? He said, you know what? You've asked too many why questions. Justification has come to an end. The ontology doesn't justify.
Telling you why, stop at the first stage and don't say anything about realism. Just say, eat apples.
No, of course,
I ask you why. I don't need to justify anything because anyway it's going to come to an end. So I'll just stop with eat apples. Well, first they say, no, I'm not convinced. But maybe I shouldn't eat apples. You say, no, there's nothing else to say because anyway it's going to come to an end. So what's the point in talking anymore?
In general,
that's not how the debate goes, right?
No, in general, it's true that justifications come to an end somewhere. And it doesn't follow from it that anywhere where you want to bring it to an end is just as good as any other place where you want to bring it to an end. That's not a problem for realism, that's a problem for everyone. And as far as I can see, the ontological story is not a part of the justificatory story. I take it that's a part of our disagreement. I don't know what you're basing the historical claim on, but I won't engage you on the history. Right?
Well, certainly in the religious case, right? Why should you do it? Because God says.
But that's different because
that's the origin.
I think that I don't know. I think there are different ways of understanding the religious view here too. And maybe according to some, that's a part of it. But if you just think about the ontological claim as an ontological claim, as a claim about what the wrongness of genocide consists in.
How can it be morally irrelevant?
I didn't say it was morally. It's not a part of the. It's not a part of the reason.
How can it not be? If
just like H2O is not a part of the story of how of the fact that things get wet because they come into close connection with water.
But it can be not part of the reason, but part of the question what it constitutes.
It's a very good answer to a very good question.
No,
just not that question.
No, I can agree with you about that, but still, she might have a force in using counterfactual strategy to be skeptical about the constitution.
I agree. So we need to talk about the facts again.
So it's equal.
A question about your needing
just make it short because. Just make it short.
I have a question, but I won't ask it. You can have a semantic. I think that you can get everything you want without disjunction by using context-sensitive semantics in which every appearance of good there is a variable in it, and the context fixes the good-making property. Why do you need all this disjunction? And this is something that you use anyway. So why do you need to define the good property as a disjunction? Sorry?
It's not my position. It's not just contextualism.
The virtue theoretic component is really important. I mean, because it is just contextualism. Then it sounds like cheating, as David said. And also, I want to defend that there is contextualism, but you can still have realism. Otherwise, contextualism will just collapse to realism of some sort. And the whole idea builds on the notion of a virtuous agent. If there is no real virtuous agent, it is culturally constructed. If there are no universal virtues like justice is, I don't know, then basically the theory does not work as a realist theory for sure.
Yanni and Vitaly.
I want to ask Christos about your notion of a virtuous agent in relation to this idea of a disjunctive property. Now, if the disjunctive is finite, then the virtuous agent has a very easy job, right? It just has to take off a finite number of disjuncts, and it doesn't seem to be doing much work, and that appears a bit too easy. But if the disjunction is infinite, or at least indefinite, without any clear specification of an upper bound, then something more needs to be said about what the virtuous person does.
I think that's the right position to criticize, I think, because I build a lot on the notion of a virtuous agent. I would
then
say
tell us what it is, what he does or what he is. Yeah.
Yes. What he does stems from what he is really. That's the idea of virtue ethics, virtue theory in general. But I would say that I definitely wouldn't say that they are finite, but I wouldn't say they are infinite too. So I would just say we don't know. And I don't know if we can know. So I would just say ethics is work in progress.
Right, but then in specifying as a virtuous person, you have to allow that he doesn't just go after the disjunctions to find out the one that's appropriate here. But that there's something creative in his identifying the relevant disjuncts. And more needs to be said about what he does and how he does it.
Well, I would like to claim that he's a generally reliable truth tracker, and he can do that on the basis of the virtues. Then you need to say a story of what are the real virtues, and whether they are truth conducive, and if they are truth conducive, how do exactly they work. That's a huge problem. I mean, you need psychology, and
Okay.
that's a very general idea.
Okay. One short question.
It's not, I think, with your time again, trying to help you. So here's another version going with justification, with intuition. So you may ask the realist, suppose we all had very strong intuition that if we would all judge genocide to be morally permissible, then it would be the case that genocide is morally permissible. Would you then think that genocide might be morally permissible? And right, so when we all had what's the realist argument against the anti-realist plays on is a very strong intuition that even if we all judge that genocide is morally permissible, still genocide wouldn't be morally permissible. So if we all had the strong intuition that if our intuition would be different, then would you still, the realist, judge, stick to your realist position and say that no matter what, that if so if your justification fails because all of us don't have the intuition that you referred to, would you then change your mind and be anti-realist and say that it might be the case that genocide is morally permissible? And I think he would say no, because the intuition would stay there. So his justification felt the intuition that the realist used, that if we all judge that genocide is permissible, then it would make genocide more permissible.
Or if you had.
Yeah, if you had. So you can go one, and the realist wouldn't be willing to give up on his realist intuition, right? So you cannot base this judgment on the intuition on this intuition, right? So if you didn't have the intuition, your realist intuition, would you give up on realism?
That's asking if you didn't have evidence for your theory, would it still be your theory?
Yeah, so
Of course not, because I wouldn't have evidence for it. But now that I acknowledge that without evidence I wouldn't believe a theory, that doesn't mean that I have to reject the theory now that I have the evidence.
No, but that's the exact analog to your argument against the actuality, right? Exact analog.
No, it's not.
So the argument is not. So the argument
is metaphysical. It's not the claim. The objectionable confession for the anti-realist is a metaphysical claim. It's not about what you have believed about genocide had you had different attitudes. The question is, would the fact that we have different and make genocide okay?
But what
That's the
you use
question.
here is
Your
our
question is
intuition.
epistemological.
But what you use here, so what you place on is our intuition that the answer is.
I use the evidence.
But if
yes,
that,
it's intuition. But the role is epistemic.
Yeah, so I'm just using a second order intuition. The intuition that if your intuition would be different, then you would still hold your
But on Melis is anti-realist, the attitudes of people are truth makers. On the realist, the realist intuitions are not what makes realism true. At best, they are our epistemic avenue, our way to acknowledging the truth.
It's not that
They
the
don't
bit is
have
right,
metaphysical-
but the time is Here's the last word. Yeah.
As you already mentioned.